Bună seara! Bună seara, doamnelor! Bună seara, domnilor! Suntem Ioana Bâldea Constantinescu și Marius Constantinescu și, înainte de toate, vă mulțumim că sunteți în această seară aici alături de noi, la Biblioteca Centrală Universitară, la o ocazie excepțională și cuvântul este chiar cum nu se poate mai potrivit astăzi, pentru că avem această bucurie și această onoare de a-i spune bun venit în România laureatului Premiului Nobel pentru literatură în anul 2021, Abdulrazak Gurnah.
Abdulrazak Gurnah se află la București, la invitația Editurii Litera, care a publicat traduceri ale romanelor sale semnate de Andreea Năstase în colecția de autori care îi este dedicată. Vineri, 25 octombrie, va fi invitatul Festivalului Internațional de Literatură și Traducere de la Iași, FILIT, și pe scena Teatrului Vasile Alexandrie îl veți putea vedea sau revedea, aceia dintre dumneavoastră care veți călători la Iași, într-un dialog cu jurnalistul 𝐬𝐻𝐿in Ștefănescu.
Revenind la întâlnirea noastră de astăzi, ea face parte și va putea fi văzută și în rama proiectului 4 cititori, o singură carte, la TVR Cultural din această toamnă. Vom fi astăzi 3 cititori pe scenă, evident că al 4-lea cititor îl reprezentați dumneavoastră, publicul.
Vom avea rugămintea să vă folosiți în continuare de căștile pe care le-ați primit la intrarea în sală pentru a vă putea bucura pe deplin de seara aceasta și de prezența scriitorului Abdulrazak Gurnah, de prezența laureatului Nobel pe 2021, Abdulrazak Gurnah. Professor Gurnah, welcome and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
First of all, Professor Gurnah, once again, thank you for gracing us with your presence tonight. After a voyage from London, here you are. You have landed just 2 hours ago. Nevertheless, you are here for this much-awaited encounter with your Romanian readers. I would start our dialogue tonight with something that you have said more than once. You said that when you came to England back in 1968, when these words such as asylum seeker were not quite the same, well, today, things to be somehow different. More people are struggling and running from terror states. So my first question would be, how do you think that the refugee status shifted from your days as a refugee to the present?
Okay. Well, there are several things to unpick a little bit there, because there is a way in which the language of speaking about people who are arriving from outside of Europe has become kind of homogenized. So that we use the word refugee, asylum seeker, immigrant, whatever, as if they mean the same thing all the time, when in fact they don't. It's very important, I think, to distinguish between who is a refugee and who is an asylum seeker, and who is somebody who might be, let's say, for example, a medical practitioner who's coming to Europe as an immigrant to look for work. These are all different categories. And I think it's important to always keep reminding ourselves that whereas those who dislike the appearance of these people in Europe put them all together and see them all as people who are somehow disastrous for us, somehow bad for us, and to distinguish. So, to begin, I understand your question. I'm not losing sight of your question. But I just want to make sure that we do separate these things. A refugee, it seems to me, clearly, is somebody who has no choice. A refugee is somebody who's probably his or her life is at risk in one form or another. The risk might be war, it might be total deprivation of a kind that cannot be negotiated anymore, or it could even be just anxiety. But the refugee imagines him or herself as without recourse, without choice, which is not the case, say, for an asylum seeker, always, and it most certainly is not the case for an immigrant who says, I want to go and find a better life somewhere else. And there's nothing wrong with any of those. None of those are crimes. Those are circumstances that people find themselves in.
Thank you so very much. I think this is a very powerful sentence. A refugee is somebody who has no choice. And I would also like to personally thank you as a reader of your work and as somebody who understood more about what it means to be a human being through your works. And starting from, by the same token, starting from this very idea that you just highlighted, I found that in-betweenness is one of the most important spaces your writings map. Now your characters, they're always torn between home and exile, self and otherness, love and desertion. Yet in-betweenness seems to be the only constant of their lives. And I wanted to ask you, how can a place of despair simultaneously function as a starting point, as a place of hope?
I guess it's not a place of despair. It's a place of perhaps uncertainty, or perhaps even, I use the word anxiety a lot to describe the conditions that we find ourselves in. But it's not a terminus, it's not the end point. This is the whole point, I suppose, about how we respond to these frightened stories about what these people will do to our societies, is that when people are given an opportunity, or rather when people find an opportunity, they don't have to be given one, then they make a life. They make a life for themselves, they make a life for their children, they send their children to school, they open a bakery, perhaps even they become successful, or they become prime ministers of different countries. And so what I'm thinking of is that people, when they find themselves in these extremely difficult circumstances, sometimes it feels as if there is no way out. But most of the time, they don't give up. What do you do if you give up? There is no option. You can't give up. You go on, you do things. And they do better, and they do things. And so, well, that's the lesson, I guess. That's what I celebrate in saying, when people find themselves in these situations, they're not finished.
You have used this refugee status as a lens to perceive and to see the world, at least from a creative point of view. I mean, it seems to be the major filter which we can apply to the corpus of your writings. Was it homesickness? Was it a struggle to adapt? Or was it actually a deeper questioning of who you really are?
Well, it was probably a little bit of all of those things. But more than that as well, it's more being, I live in this world, and I have an understanding of what's going on in this world, and I'm studying it and living in it. And so it's both about my personal experience and my desire to understand it and to contextualize it, to see how it works in this world, but also because of what I see and because of what I hear and the stories that I see and the things that move me, the injustices and the wrongness, and this narrative which I think it's important to resist. You know what I mean by narrative, don't you? The story of what these people are and who these people are. It goes a long way back. It's not just about refugees. It's not just about asylum seekers. It's about other things too. It's about colonialism. It's about stupidity. It's about intelligence. It's about civilization. All of those things. So my writing is about all of those things too.
Thank you for underlining that.
When you were awarded the Nobel in 2021, the jury spoke about the lingering trauma of colonialism, war, and displacement to be found in your work. Now we have a full house tonight. You began writing in your 20s. What do you think changed within the reading public ever since?
Yeah, sure, things have changed quite a lot. I mean, I don't know how things have changed here. You've gone through your own colonialisms more than once. And we know, I was looking around asking, Ioana, where was it Ceausescu did that speech on the balcony? I was watching it on the news. And apparently it's just across the road there, yeah.
Right near this building.
Yeah, I know. So, you know about these things. It's not like I'm... So, colonialism's come in many, many different forms, historically. And here you've experienced many different forms, so have we. And so has the world. So, but when we're talking about the most recent form, at least from our part of the world, your part of the world has had a different colonialism, which is the Soviet colonialism, or the Russian and then the Soviet. We had a more kind of like European-wide colonialism, where every European, even little Portugal, owned part of our world. And we were all kind of not even subjects of these powers. We were belongings in some way, in the sense of subjects have a right to speak, have a right to vote, have a right to this and that. Colonized people did not have any of these rights. So we were not really even subjects. We were just objects of these powers. So colonialism was a very, very destructive, coercive, extractive phenomenon for most non-European people. And it takes a long time for those things to be worked out. And there are many different things to be done, both at a narrative level, at an economic level, political level, and so on.
Professor Gurnah, we were talking earlier backstage about different languages and the way they shift our way of thinking. Now, Swahili is your mother tongue, and English is your pen language. And I was very curious, do primal emotions have different intensities from one language to the other?
I don't know. I don't know. I, of course, grew up speaking Swahili and still speak it, and it's my first language. But I think language and writing, or rather the writer's relationship to a language, is not as straightforward as all that. It's not a matter of which is the best language for me. It's the language that kind of chooses you, rather than you choose the language, I think. If that sounds a bit mysterious, it's not. It's simply
beautifully put. It's beautifully put. Anyway.
All right. You can't always say, I often use this, so if you read stuff and you've heard me say this, I often think of a sporting metaphor for this. It's not like you can say, I'm going to be a high jumper, or I'm going to be a sprinter. You have to have whatever it is that makes a sprinter, or whatever it is that makes a high jumper, to be able to do these things. You can't select these things. Well, this may be a crude metaphor, but I think of a writer like that as well. You know, you can't just say, I'm going to write in, I don't know, Latin or something. It's the language that you feel in, the language that works when you're comfortable in it. So I could write in Swahili, I could write in English, but Most of the writing in Swahili that I did was letters to my mother, that kind of thing. But I didn't feel, because I wasn't reading in Swahili after a certain time in my life. I was reading in English, and writing is also about what you read to a certain extent. It's what you intertext with, it's what you respond to, what informs you, whatever. So it wasn't even a question of what language should I write in. That's the language I was writing in, because that's the language I was reading in. And it's only when people, after I've been writing for a while, they say, why? I think, I don't know. That's how it came. Why worry? That's how it came, and that's how I feel comfortable.
As a matter of fact, I really like that mystery thing related to my question and to your answering to it, because I think also mystery may be a part in this permanent game with the language, but with the mind.
You think so?
Yeah.
But well, you like mystery, but a lot of people don't like mystery. They say, why? It's treachery. You should write in your own language. As if somehow there is an obligation. There is no obligation to write. Nobody's saying to anybody, write. Writers choose to write. They say, I'm going to write. No, why can't I choose what language I want to write in if I want? It's not an obligation. It's not a national responsibility or something like that. You don't have to do it.
Well, I like the mystery too, and especially I like your definition of language and creativity and writing as a place of freedom and a place of choice. Still, I'm going to stay on the same territory and ask you what is the language you use when you argue with yourself?
I don't know what you do. I don't argue with myself. I agree with myself most of the time.
That's wonderful.
No. It's not different, really. I mean, there is no complication about this. Sometimes people say, what language do you dream in? I don't dream in a language. There is a different language of dream, which is not to do with words.
No grammar to it, actually.
No what?
No grammar, no syntax,
no, indeed.
just feeling.
It's kind of, for me anyway, dreams are kind of just visuals. And if anybody speaks, they speak in a way that is not words, but it's just somehow understood, you know? So I don't know if there's language. Maybe other people dream in words. But I use, there are certain times when I speak to myself in Swahili, there are certain times I speak in English. Sometimes I sing in English, not in front of anybody. And sometimes in Swahili, when I can do both things. I guess because I live in England and most of the time I'm speaking to people in England, English predominates, but it's not impossible to just slip out of it when it's necessary or when it's required or when it suits me. And when I'm writing, sometimes I find I'm constructing a conversation in Swahili and then reframing it so that it's in English or whatever. It's okay, you can move around like this. It's perfectly okay. And you don't, unlike the idea, certainly when I started out as a student, one of the favorite theses was that people who are let's say, for example, speaking one language but being educated in a European language, they become divided in some way and that their identity is somehow confused. And it's crap. It's crap. It's beautiful. You have both. It's dynamic. You have both things. And those of you who are here who are from one culture and another, living in one language and another, you know that you can do that. You can do that, and it doesn't turn you into a freak. You can do it. And in fact, it gives you a new way of understanding something that people who only have one language don't have.
Thank you so much. I think we really needed that tonight.
I would underline now maybe a lesser known thing about you, that you are the editor of a book called A Companion to Salman Rushdie. And I would use this thing to build up my next question. That is, who were or still are the writers that reinforced your own literary voice?
There are too many to list. Well, truly, it's a very difficult question, and it's one that keeps cropping up. It's not, and it's not kind of evasion on my part, really, although it is to a certain extent. Partly it's because this changes. There's a certain time. There's a certain time when you're reading this writer or this writer's work or this group of writers, and they absorb you and so on. And then you move on, something else happens, and so it's not possible to, without simplifying, it's not possible to name writers and say, okay, this is the one that's important. At different times, many of them are. There was a certain time in my student life, I was a student of literature, when I read Flaubert for the first time, and I thought, what's the point? What's the point of writing when somebody can write a book like this? Give up, go and do something else, and so on. And it goes on, and you read. I read lots of other things. So it's very difficult to answer that question about influences. All I can say is that, I wish they would all stay as important as they did at one time, because one of the disappointments is that as you go on, you think, I can't read that guy anymore. I hate his books. And you go through this experience of reading writers and loving their work, and then at a certain point, for whatever reason, either you change as a reader, or you find out something, and you think, I can't bear this, I can't bear. Now I know this about Sartre. I can't read Sartre anymore, or whatever it might be. I'm only using Sartre as an example. Philip Roth, or whoever. So that too happens. So I could name somebody, and you might think, what? You like him? Or something like that. So I'm evading your question.
Yes, I have noticed that. Since you were evading my question, I decided to switch it a bit. So I'm going to ask you, what do you admire the most in a fellow writer today? I'm very persistent.
He's crafty. I admire writers who write, really, I mean, this may sound, I admire writers who write truthfully. Which may sound like, okay, everybody writes truthfully, but I don't think so. I think I admire writers who write without exaggeration and without faking things, and without taking too many positions that are kind of self-aggrandizing or something like that. I admire writers who don't want to put themselves up on a polemical platform and say, do this, do this, do this to other people. I don't believe, I believe that for myself anyway, that as a writer I try to say, to write about what I know and what I see and what matters, but I don't think I'm saying to anybody, do what agree with me or something like that. If you do, fine, but if you don't, okay. So, I don't know if that's an adequate answer.
He is very persistent. Now, we have the copies of your Romanian editions of your novels here on display, and the public is familiar with them. I personally have a favorite. I could not resist temptation to ask you about my personal favorite, which is Paradise. Now, in Paradise, you wrote about a child, Yusuf, who is sold and who becomes property before having the chance to grow into a free young man. Now, planning on a garden of love seems to be the only way out. And my question to you is, what does it take to grow a garden inside your mind when you are not free?
Yeah, well, I like the idea of making. In several of the books I have a gardener. It's not only Yusuf, it's... Yes,
the garden is recurrent.
There's also Hamdani, yeah. So I like people who make things. I try and bring one of these guys into my writings. So when I was thinking of Yusuf, when I was thinking of that novel, I had also in mind the idea of how a child, a person who is, well, an orphaned child, how they find a way of recovering themselves in some way. And the garden seemed to be at least one possibility. And paradise, as you may know, I don't know if you do, but as you may know, paradise actually means a walled garden. Okay.
Comes from Persian.
From Farsi, yeah, from Persian, yeah. And so I had the garden in mind from the beginning. The garden was going to be a metaphor, an idea. And the garden is also about nurturing. It's also about labor. It's also about making, growing. A bit like writing. So the connection, to some extent, was that how can this boy find safety? And I thought those kinds of activities would be ways of describing a form of resourcefulness that would allow, after all, if you can spend time enjoying, understanding, nurturing, then in a way you also are nurturing yourself.
Thank you.
I had been given the honor to make an interview with you, thanks to your publishing house in Romania, Litera, during the pandemic, freshly after you've been awarded the Nobel Prize. And I would ask you, aside from consolidating your authorship and your prominence in the literary world, did the Nobel also grant you a louder social voice?
Well, if it did, it's not one I'm using. I think what it did, I understand your question. The question is that there are many people who assume that being given the Nobel Prize in literature, particularly in literature, and we don't really know, many of us, who received the Nobel Prize in economics in 2021, do we? Do we? Perhaps some people do, but probably not very many. Maybe you have to be in the business. But literature is the, as it were, the popular one. It's the one we know about, because that's what we ordinarily consume, rather than those other people who, of course, are kind of running our world behind our backs. But anyway, but literature we know about. We know who are the Nobel, whatever. But the other side of this is that we also assume that those guys, those people, those men and women who get given the Nobel Prize in literature are somehow wiser than others, and they're not. They just maybe possibly write books well, but doesn't mean they can answer deep questions, you know, about what do we do with our world. They can't answer some of the questions that are to do with our, you know, what we need to know about. They're just like us. So I'm afraid if it is an opportunity to do that, it's not an opportunity I have taken, because I really, I don't think, I try to say this as sensibly, I try to say this as sensibly as I possibly can. If the Swedish Academy decided to award me the Nobel Prize for what I've been doing, why should I change it? I just carry on doing what I've been doing.
Professor Gurnah, you are now visiting an ex-communist country where migration only begins to happen and cultural and social contrasts are sharpening by the day. Now, what ingredient of your literary work do you think is the one that people all over the world seem to deeply react to?
Well, honestly, I think you have the answer to that better than me. Really. It's precisely what I'm saying, really. you understand that I also grew up in a country which was colonized until I think the age of 13 and something, maybe 14. When we had our independence, within a month there was a revolution. The revolution was quite bitter and nasty and violent. And I don't think we have lived, or our country, lived in a free country. Even today. I don't live there permanently, but until today. So I don't know. There are a lot of things I can say about what needs to be done in a place like ours. And these are very basic things. Maybe you have them here already, but we don't have them. You are now part of the EU, so you probably are almost required to have them. We don't have hospitals that work. You probably do. We don't have schools that work. You probably do. We don't have roads that work. You probably do. So I don't know if I can give advice about what to read. What I would like to say, and I keep saying, is that until we can provide these things, we can't even speak of ourselves as a civil society. Books are impossible, expensive. School kids only read, or ordinary people only read what they're given to read at school. No, I can't give you advice.
I think your books do.
Fine, read the books.
There was some emphasis put on the struggle of your publishers after the Nobel, since some of your novels were not widely available, some were outside Britain. So, your publishers do have to struggle after your Nobel. But do you, Abdulrazak Gurnah, have to struggle about something after your Nobel?
Yeah, I have to struggle with traveling, I suppose. No, I don't really. It's a wonderful thing. For many reasons. The most wonderful thing about being awarded such recognition is, of course, that is what every writer would want to happen, is to recognize your work. Because it's not about a book, it's about your work. So that's the first thing. Just simply readers, I don't know who they are, or I didn't know who they were. They say, okay, we think your books are good. This year, we're going to say you are the one that deserves this. How can you say anything's bad about that? It's great. It's recognition. It's also wonderful because it means, because of the nature of the prize, it's a global prize. Everybody knows about it. Even people who don't read know about, Nobel Prize. Oh, do you really? My neighbors say, Nobel, awesome. But, it's not that they read, they know what it is, that's all. So there is that. And what that means is that people then say, well, maybe I should read one of his books. So you acquire new readers. I mean, just in an ordinary way. But also, different people in different parts of the world want to read this guy, this person, this woman in their own languages. So, translations, etc. It's just, what can be wrong with it? It's wonderful.
I have a little secret to share with the audience tonight, and I will take advantage of your presence on this stage with the beginning of 2025. So next year we're going to have another one of your novels translated, published in Romanian. It's Theft. Your translator is working on it right now.
There she is.
There she is. So my question to you would be, what keeps you writing?
Well, I guess the same thing that's I've been doing all this time. I mean, there is some suggestion that when writers are awarded the Nobel Prize and somehow they can't write anymore, Well, there are two explanations for that. Not in every case, but many of the people who are given Nobel Prizes, just like me, are in their 70s. And by this time, you probably, in most cases, have written all your best work, and they're kind of scrabbling around in the cupboard to see, is there anything I've missed that I can, somehow or the other put together? So that's one possibility. That's why when people, after the Nobel Prize, don't write. The other is that you end up doing quite a lot of traveling because people want to meet you. And I don't, that's fine, that's fair enough. Your readers want to see you and hear you, and you want to meet them and that kind of thing. So it's part of the deal kind of thing, that we want you and I want you, and so you come. So there isn't quite so much time to write anymore. But I don't know if it's somehow to do with sort of a kind of a dulling of whatever the process of writing. I haven't felt that. I was in the middle of writing this book that Andrea's translating at the moment, which is going to be published in March in English. It's all to do with publishers' schedules. It could have been published in September, but anyway. I was in the middle of writing that when the award came. So I had to stop and deal with the process of being celebrated, which was lovely. But then after a while, there was time to go back and write and finish the book and so on. And now it's about to appear. So I don't know. I think, when I'm sitting down to write, I don't, in front of my computer, like most of us do these days. Sometimes I write by hand, but most of the time on the computer. I don't sit there and say, computer, like you can say to your computer these days, or your car, or whatever. I don't say, computer, here's a Nobel Prize writer writing. Pay attention. Make this sentence work. I still have to do it. The computer doesn't do anything. The computer does what I put in. So I don't think it makes any difference to me. I don't say to myself, here you go, is that a Nobel Prize sentence? No. You just still do the same business that has to be done, which is how to work out whatever it is that you're trying to work out, and does it sound right? That kind of thing. I don't think that changes. For me, it hasn't changed anyway.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nobel Prize winner 2021 for Literature, Professor Abdulrazak Gurnah. It's been an honor tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you.
Doamnelor și domnilor, înainte să vă invităm pentru autografe, avem câteva mulțumiri de adresat în această seară. Mulțumiri doamnei Mirei Redoi, director general al Bibliotecii Centrale Universitare Carol I, domnului Ioan Cristescu, director al Muzeului Național al Literaturii Române, parteneri ai evenimentului, doamnelor Cătălina Hirceac și Iulia Voievozeanu, care au asigurat traducerea la cască. Dat fiind că ora este destul de târzie, vă vom ruga să acceptați faptul că autografele nu vor fi personalizate, este vorba doar despre o semnătură, dar cu toate acestea vă invităm să vă bucurați de prezența câștigătorului Premiului Nobel pentru Literatură pe 2021, Abdulrazak Gurnah, acum cu noi în România pe scenă.